And as I promised, if at all possible, I will deviate to any subject that somebody desperately has the courage to come up and ask about. Otherwise, I have another 40 minutes of prepared remarks. Yes, sir. I knew there'd be somebody not afraid of losing their job here.
I have to go back a few years for this. Before I joined the government, I was a controller for a very small company. It was a woman-owned small business, and we had a contract.
Be careful what you call small. You know, it's when you start your own business, it seems big compared to what you started. Yours may have been bigger than mine.
Well, you got to remember, I wasn't the owner. I was just the controller of the small woman-owned business, and we had a Defense Department contract, and it left a very bad taste in my mouth, because on the recompete we lost because our large business came in, basically took all our employees, bid the contract, won the contract, rated all our employees, and continued on as normal. And we filed a protest, and the government had a thing where they could just say, oh, well, we'll fix it. We spent like $10,000 in lawyers' fees and got absolutely nothing out of it. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention to see if there could be any reform in the bid protest process so that when a small company brings up a protest, they don't spend $10,000, $15,000, $30,000 in lawyers' fees just to have the government turn around and say, oh, well, we fixed it, everything's fine, you lost the contract. What they ended up doing was rebidding the contract a second time. The company that won it originally lost out. We lost out because we didn't have our employees that we had, and some third company won. We ended up bringing a problem, because the problem was initially with the contracting officer. They acted inappropriately in awarding the contract. We had the lowest price, and they gave it to a larger business, because the rumor was that the contracting officer wanted a large business. They didn't want to deal with a small business anymore. They wanted a large business. Essentially, I guess the contracting officer was reprimanded. I believe that they were removed. But the point is, we spent all of our money bringing this to the government's attention, and we got absolutely nothing out of it. So I guess I would just encourage you, it's not really a question, it's just, I think, how do you fix that so that small businesses are more willing to bring significant protests to the government without the fear that A, they're going to lose business, and B, they're going to spend all this money and get absolutely nothing out of it?
You know, I'd love to answer that, but I'm going to answer it by bringing up something that's slightly more current. We have a lot of problems in the protest. One of them that has been currently being brought to our committee, and these are by reluctant whistleblowers, companies like the one you worked for, who say, I'll tell you, but please don't have a hearing, please don't call me, I don't want to lose the other jobs I have. And that seems to be a constant fear. Over the last number of years, we've had a significant amount of insourcing. Companies who are doing a job without a competitive question of can it be done less expensively by bringing into government a job that's currently outsourced, or in some cases, moving it to a favored son of NIH or some other agency. And what we have done is we've accumulated a very large amount of these small companies. It's our committee's intention to go into the question of where does the government get the best value, and are the mechanisms in place to show what the best value is? That includes this more current problem that I see, which is that we have things which are out of house. They're being deemed to be, quote, inherently governmental without a common standard, and then they're being taken in-house. And in those cases, people are being approached before they're being taken in-house to be told that they will be and that they should become government workers proactively. So yours reminds me of that. But there's no question, in some cases, we're also seeing exactly what you described, which is big government likes big vendors. Big government thinks you get good small vendors by hiring a big vendor and having the big vendor take care of the little vendor. And so your problem is one that's twofold. We have to increase the core competency of the federal procurement officer so there's enough of them able to administer small companies and aren't simply trying to lighten their load by going for big companies, which is a problem that we're going to try and deal with, which probably will increase in some cases the number of federal workers. At the same time, the goal of our committee is to set up a structure so that going forward, any administration of any party will have to cost justify bringing something in-house and have to cost compete taking something out of house. Because the one thing we don't do well in government, cost based on a decision, we make a decision and then try to justify the cost, and I think that's what you saw. So thank you for that, and we will be, watch us on that one. And I promise not to tip off too many hearings, but this is one that is very clearly needs to be looked at, most of it in private, perhaps some of it in public. Did that spark any other question? Because I would never have gotten to that subject, even though it's an important one. Yes, sir. And by the way, if I've taken over this format, at any point, tell me. Now, I'm not a chairman yet, so if you tell me, I got to quit. Yes, sir.
Good morning, Congressman. My name is Ken Diefenbach. I'm a NASA OIG special agent. My question is about suspension and debarment. And I understand that there is some research going on by Allison Lerner and others in the IG community to collect better data on agencies' use of that tool. But my question for you is the problem of suspension and debarment on your radar screen, and what do you plan to do about it? And the particular issue I'm concerned about is that there is the law of suspension and debarment, the rules and regulations, but there are many agencies that don't utilize it as well as they could. And what really concerns me as a fraud investigator is there are lots of instances where we spend years and years investigating an entity, yet the government continues to fund them and give them more and more money. And that's a real frustration, because they're continued to receive this money while we're still trying to figure out what they did with last year's money.
Well, it's a great question, and my predecessors of both parties have held hearings on various parts of this. We have database problems in ensuring a common database, both for the companies and, of course, the individuals. And Earl, sometime you should make a presentation on how you put together the lattice work in your organization of people and entities and locations and find those repeats. So on one hand, we can as a committee ensure that what you're saying comes to pass, which is there is a uniform system that if you're debarred in one place, you're debarred in all places. If you're a criminal in one company, you can't go to another company or be a principal in another company. We do need to do that, and that's something that's bipartisan. I think you're going to find Congress supportive regardless of who's in charge. What we need to have is the community come together to help us get database interoperability so that this stuff can be more transparent, because it's very clear unless we have all the information that each agency collects in a uniform way with metadata where it can be cross-referenced, somebody can in fact be in some company related to some company and continue to do work and continue to steal from the government long after they've gone through debarment in some other group. So it is an area we will be holding continued hearings. It's one of those areas where I hope to accomplish what my predecessors have started, but my predecessors hope to accomplish probably something, and this includes Waxman, Tom Davis, and even Ed Towns. I think that the time has become right to show that there should be zero tolerance for access to government jobs and government income, because there's plenty of people standing in line right now who would love to be suppliers to the government. We don't have to take the misfits and the ones who are proven not to be reliable. So I think you've come at the right time to say, isn't it a great time to enforce, because there's no shortage. We still will have the problem that in Washington, it is very hard when you find a really large company who has lots and lots of examples that to a smaller company would lead them without contracts. The real crime is when they get a contract again. But we're going to try and deal with that in companies of all sizes, and hopefully everybody here will hold us to that standard of not just dealing with the person who imports Chinese communist-made 1974 rounds for AK-47s when in fact they were supposed to provide new rounds for the Afghan army. That case is easy because it was a shell company. We need to go to the next level and say, even if you've been doing business for 20 years, you can find yourself out, or some of your individuals out, for doing exactly the same thing, but maybe with a little more panache. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir. Now, you always get the best questions from men in bow ties. My father-in-law, a bow tie person, told me that. Yes, sir.
Congressman, my name is Ken Donahue. I'm the former Inspector General at HUD as of 3 weeks ago. I'm delighted to be here. I have a question for you that I think affects the IG community as a whole, and I think it needs to be brought to your attention. It has to do with frivolous lawsuits. What we find as IGs, not only in the department, but also within the IG community, often is constant lawsuits that are brought upon by employees, but also that plagues the departments. Now, some are very meritorious, but many of them are not. And I think we'd find in our community that we see in departments that it's a money-making machinery. And what you find is most of these cases are litigated within the Washington, D.C. area. And I think one of the things I think it's been discussed among us, but I think needs to be brought and addressed, is often just department's willingness to litigate and settle these things out of court, often without merit. And I think a study was made, there'd be millions and millions and millions of dollars that go to these frivolous lawsuits at the expense of the taxpayer. So I just want to bring it to your attention. I know that I've talked to many of the IGs here, many of my colleagues here, but it's something that's very, very important to, I think, your committee.
Now, that's a good one. I will say that when someone says frivolous lawsuit in America, there's two camps. Those who say, but what about the meritorious ones? And those who say, but what about the dollars? I'm in the camp of what about the dollars? Not every question deserves an answer, and yours is one that I'm just taking down because I believe that it is one that we should add to our intent to try to drive that figure down. I will say that I have a working agreement with the Senate right now to try to get rid of one of the most frivolous lawsuits you can imagine. How many of you have ever seen a product that says patented under and the numbers are on the product, you know, like the back of a Schlage lock or whatever? Well, there's over 530 lawsuits right now where, because of a court decision, people find an expired patent on the back of a product at a store, and not people, for law firms, and then they file these claims saying it's a false marking. Now, the patent is real, the patent is simply expired. The product is the product that the patent was under, but it's simply expired. And we're just trying to make a change to say that, not that they can't bring that, but that they have to have standing. They have to be injured because there but for knowing that they would have made the product. It's a 2-year-old bill, and I'm hoping to get it done because I don't have any question the president would sign it. I don't even have any question that no senator would vote no on it with a straight face if they had to stand election in a few weeks. But we will try to work on those issues government-wide. I'm a big fan that the administrative process is government's defense against frivolous lawsuits, and that may be how we balance justice and yet at the same time minimize those claims that are brought only because they can get to a convenient venue and be heard favorably. Other subjects, because you know I've got those supposed 280 hearings a year. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Beth Richardson. I'm from the NASA Office of Inspector General as well. And you mentioned, I think, $1.4 billion a year you think
1.4 trillion.
Trillion, okay.
We confuse them in Washington all the time.
I was wondering if you could give us some specific areas you think that waste can be found.
I suspect that there's $40 billion worth of Medicare payments that either go to things not needed or even wanted by the patient, or never get to the patient at all, but in fact are fraudulently being applied for. Now that's an estimate, but it's an estimate I've heard from pretty smart people that would be a pretty reasonable annual cost of how much could be saved in Medicare if you could hypothetically eliminate all the fraud and waste in the process. And I mean no patient failing to get what they asked for. And I'll just give you a simple example. My father-in-law, or stepfather actually, is a heart patient. And he just came out of the VA, has more medicines than Carter ever had little pills. And he He was taken off a medicine, and my mom is still trying to get that medicine to quit coming automatically through his Medicare, because once they got it on, and it's a by mail thing, and it's expensive. Just being able to not get something that you're no longer on turns out to be difficult. So that's low-hanging fruit. But I will tell you, there's some other areas. We talk about prevailing wage in government, and I know it's important to the union industry out there, but I also know that there's a real question of whether prevailing wage is accurately set at, if you will, the ordinary and customary cost, or if every government job, I certainly know in California this is true, ends up costing more than any private sector job, even if they use a comparable union team. So that's another area of reform where nobody really loses. You simply get people to sharpen their pencil to an effective rate so that getting a government job is a good job, but not a really great job, which sometimes it is. And NASA is an example where you have a limited budget. If we can get 10% of the cost, whether it's Corps of Engineers overhead or other areas, out of your expenditures, we free up 10% more for projects that today cannot be done within your budget. It may not always be about reducing spending completely. It may be about whether missions can be accomplished that today are on that nice to do but not going to happen anytime soon. I'm convinced that I have very little chance of living to see a mission to Mars, a manned mission to Mars. I'm sometimes worried about whether I'll ever see a mission to the moon again in my lifetime. And I don't think that's outrageous for people that have been watching what NASA's had to put up with in its budget and its cost over the years. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
I guess the first part of my question is, first, I'm Robert Eubank. I'm with the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, the DoDIG. Does your committee's oversight extend to contracting overseas in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Kuwait?
It does, and
Okay.
we've held some hearings. The chairman before last particularly concentrated on the enormous cost overruns and failures of building the embassy in Baghdad. But we own a national security component, and we definitely own all of those contracting cost oversight.
I've been deployed 3 times, once to Iraq, twice to Kuwait with the ICCTF, the International Contract Corruption Task Force. Our sole purpose over there is public corruption and contract fraud. We normally get onesies, twosies, maybe 3 or 4 investigations over a period of time. We get a little bit of money back. But there is so much money being spent over there that falls into the procurement fraud, grant fraud. It's unreal. And we don't have the necessary controls to be able to recoup those US dollars because we don't have the mechanisms in place on the political level through DOJ, Office of International Affairs, the Chief of Mission, to be able to enforce what we need to do, because it's the US dollars that are getting spent over there to support all kinds of operations, including living conditions, troops, everything. And so when those dollars get wasted and you have contractors that come and go, there are so many shell corporations over there. One man can own 15 companies, and how do you debar all 15 of those? When we don't have the ability or jurisdiction to extend that oversight to those foreign entities, that cripples us. And it makes investigators like me and the task force, other members, CIDs, MPFU, the FBI, Department of State, OSI, all these agencies, we feel crippled because we're sent there to do a job, but we can't do it because we don't have the political backing to support us in what it is we've been asked to do. Can you address that?
I can. It's going to take me 2 years or more.
I have the time.
I think I found a crowd pleaser here. I've taken this down. It is in the mainstream of our committee's jurisdiction, and it is an area that's ripe. We certainly can help ensure that there's a standard of transparency that goes with anyone who signs on for our dollars worldwide. I suspect it's going to be not at a big public hearing, but a lot of technical fixes that we can work with DOD and all the other, the State Department and so on, to make sure that we give them the authority and in fact the push. But I appreciate that one because it's one of those where our committee has generally done gotcha after the fact, and there's not a lot of savings in gotcha. There's just a lesson not learned that we keep, or a lesson learned that we keep learning over and again. So I think your suggestion is a good one. By the way, for my staff in the back, Larry, Brady, where are you? Okay, anyone who's too shy but would like to get into a queue of things that we need to know, don't feel bad to see my staff in the back. No, I'm serious. We are, as I said in the opening, we're part of a teaming. We're very much like, we all know that you can go straight to the IG even though they're not in your chain of command in an agency. We're the same way. We have to be open and available to ideas and to whistleblowers who may feel that they can't handle it in their lane, but maybe we can make it to where you can handle it in your lane if you can't today. Which brings up a point that I alluded to in the opening. I'm absolutely dedicated to ensure that Senate-confirmed IGs and their reports find themselves with a standard that is what Congress intended to have. When Congress passed the law that said it was inform Congress in 90 days before termination, they did not intend an IG to get 90 days severance pay. They intended for Congress to be consulted, the case to be made, and if there was a right and legitimate termination, of course, it would go forward, but that it should be open to a set of eyes that perhaps wanted the information, wanted the aggressiveness, wanted, if you will, the work that was being done, and would say, you know, that doesn't seem as far out of the lane as it is. We're hoping to do that because I want you and your staffs to feel like you can do this very hard job, even if it's not popular in your agency. So that is an area that I alluded to, but I wanted to make sure I made clear. That's something where my current chairman, who I believe will be my ranking member, and I are committed to do that together, to make it to where it's bipartisan so that you can, in fact, no matter who your boss is, feel like you can do your job, and if you do your job, you'll keep your job. And just because I told you could whisper in the back doesn't mean you can quit questions. How much longer do I have? 10 minutes, I've been told. So I've still got 30 pages, so. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. I'm the Inspector General for the Department of Education. I was wondering if you could tell us where you think the IG offices fit in terms of the general budget belt-tightening that I think we're going to see across government, because I think we do have an important job to do in terms of making things work better and all the things you've talked about. I worry a little bit about whether we're going to be asked to do, you know, more with less. We already are responding, many of us, to different budget scenarios by OMB, roll back to 2008, and deobligate all our Recovery Act oversight money and things like that. So.
Well, as somebody who was half of that bipartisan team that made sure we put in oversight money after the fact into that, we're acutely aware that if we give you more to do without more resources, you will do what you can do, but you won't do more ultimately. This is a bigger problem, and it's one that I'm not going to assume I can do quickly or that I can do without getting some buy-in from the President and the Vice President. If we're going to have the oversight that helps save money, not just the IGs, but other areas, we can't cut back the audit function. You know, I'm from corporate America. Even though I've been doing this for 10 years, I still sit on the board of a public corporation I founded. And as much as I'd like to rein in PricewaterhouseCoopers and cut their budget, I realize that that's one of the areas that you get the savings you can get by trying to present the information in an easier to understand way and so on to save transactional costs. But at the end of the day, an audit is an audit. Getting the job done is going to take a certain amount, and if it saves more than it cost, then it's cost justified. There's no question every IG, if your budgets were twice and you staffed accordingly and used the money appropriately, you would save more money for that agency by far than the amount of additional dollars they give you. And that's a case I have to make. I've already made it to Leader Boehner and Eric Cantor, the presumptive leaders on my side of the aisle, that oversight, my committee, cannot be cut just to make some symbolic statement that I'm going to need the resources, even leveraging everybody in this room and more. I'm still going to need the resources of people to digest that information and turn it into effective directions for the country to go. So on one hand, you have a champion in me to realize that, and I come from the private sector where we kind of get it, that you don't get cost savings without looking at where cost savings is. It's going to be one of those things that's going to have to be done with the administration. I think the administration is open to those kinds of input. And if I go up there, the one thing I'll remind them is that I probably have more business experience than most people working in the White House. And in that limited way, hopefully we can find something. But what you do is important, because certainly, although you don't have the largest budget to oversee, you have an entity that has declining results nationally at a time in which, if we're going to get better employment, we're going to have to make sure education works better. So thank you for what you do, and you have my pledge. We will work on that at all levels, including Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you very much.
So you don't always get an answer. Sometimes you just get a promise. Yes, sir. On that, I'm looking at somebody else looking for a promise.
Good morning. I'm from EPA IG's office.
Which IG?
EPA.
Yes.
Can you address?
Thank you for what you're going to do.
Thank you. Can you share with us your views on expanding subpoena authority to include testimonial subpoena authority?
My views are that you need to have a mechanism that is quick and effective if you need that, particularly for testimonial authority. DOD, of course, is the only one to have it. They never need to use it because they have it. Our whole point is, if there's a procedure, whether it's an individual procedure or, if you will, through a common approval process, I believe you can have it. I believe that, although the Vice President, I don't think from the AP report, brought it up yesterday, I believe I can convince the Vice President that this is one of the reforms we should do together on his watch. And look, when it comes to the EPA, you've got an awful lot of work both in the EPA, and candidly, the EPA's work often takes you to a lot of out of agency. So if there's ever a time you need subpoena authority, it's when it's not just your own people, but people at all aspects, some of whom very much could be breaking the law and hurting people, and that goes back to that public safety and clean air and clean water. So thank you for what you're going to do. I'll help you do it. Okay, I'm getting the hook. Thank you all very much.